The first World Cup I remember watching was the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. I was 7 years old. Everyone remembers Diego Maradona's hand of God against my beloved England. But I remember this man, the tournament's top scorer and winner of the Golden Boot, the one, the only Gary Lineker. I became a mad Gary Lineker fan, and he didn't even play for my club. I supported Liverpool. He played for rivals Everton, and then Barcelona, and then Spurs, but never Liverpool, but all the while scoring goal after goal for the national team. And in 1990, he did it all again. He inspired a nation, taking England again, almost to the final of the World Cup in Italy. I was 11, and I'll never forget that tournament. Today, I'm 44, and Gary Lineker has been England's best-known sports broadcaster for decades now, host of the BBC's Match of the Day show. Plus, he now has a podcast media empire that generates millions of listens every month, and a Twitter account that regularly gets him in trouble with the powers that be, whether it's his employers, the BBC, or the Conservative government of the UK. Gary uses his platform to call for compassion and hospitality for refugees. How dare he? He's expressed grief over Gaza, and he was passionately opposed to Brexit. And he's willing to stand up for those views, no matter the career consequences, once saying, and I quote, "Some things in life are more important than football." I'm delighted to say Gary Lineker joins me now. Gary, thanks so much for coming on Mehdi Unfiltered. I will try my best not to fanboy too much. As someone who was beloved when you were playing for England, the record-breaking goal scorer at the time, national hero, a guy who never got a red card, what is it like today to be often at the centre of so much national, political and media controversy in the UK, with an entire political party often attacking you personally, calling for you to be sacked because they don't like the statements you make on your Twitter account?
Well, it's slightly bizarre, Mehdi, to be to be perfectly honest. I just give my honest opinions, and generally they're not necessarily political. They're more, I think, humanitarian. So, I for many years I've kind of stuck up for the plight of refugees and the awful things and the dreadful circumstances that cause them to perhaps leave their homes, which obviously you would never want to do. So, all I've ever really asked for is a bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding. Obviously, the refugee crisis is getting bigger and bigger. There are more wars in the world. Global warming is going to cause even more. And obviously, as the UK, we can't have everybody. We know that. But we need to take our fair share. And as recent times have proved, we need immigrants to come in for the amount of jobs that we've got and needed. So, yeah, I've got in trouble sometimes usually from kind of our tabloid newspapers, one or two of them, Daily Mail in particular, that seems to dislike me. Yeah, and I don't really understand the government thing. It's not like I've ever said who would vote for in an election or anything like that. I'm probably quintessentially a kind of floating voter in many ways. So yeah, but it's all been it's fun at times, but on other times it can be a bit much.
So we'll come back to your politics in a moment, but one of your statements that got you in trouble early on, back in 2016, was when you tweeted in relation to the Conservative government's anti-immigration policies, quote, "The treatment by some towards these young refugees is hideously racist and utterly heartless. What's happening to our country?" A question a lot of people are asking, and we're on your side about. I just wonder, Gary, I haven't lived in the UK since 2015, but 8 years on from that statement, is Britain more or less racist and heartless towards refugees, especially the people who are coming in on small boats? Is the Conservative Party more or less racist or heartless? Have we got better or worse since you made that statement in 2016?
Well, when I made that statement in 2016, that was pre the days of the BBC. In those days, you couldn't make political comment if you worked in news and current affairs. If you worked in sport, like I did, you could do what you want and say what you want within reason. Of course, you've got to be relatively sensible. The rules that have now been put in place, the impartiality rules, were in 2020, so they came much later. So now, if I answered your question, I might end up being in trouble again, Mehdi. But I think by and large, I think we're a very welcoming country, and I think the small percentage of people can give an impression that is actually, I think, massively against, I think, the popular view, which is, I think most of us are like, we love people from diverse backgrounds. Part of our country and our success of it is due to that. And I think most people think that way. Some won't, and every country has its racists. But whether we've changed from then or there, I don't know, because I think people have seen that Brexit has not exactly been a triumph.
No, I think that's fair to say.
No.
Okay, so just more broadly, as a society, a lot of Muslims I know grew up like I did, watching you, fans of yours. You talk about Britain being a welcoming place. London just re-elected Sadiq Khan, a brown Muslim son of Pakistani immigrants, for a third term. That upset a lot of people like Lee Anderson, the Conservative deputy chairman, who said, Sadiq's handed London over to his Islamist friends. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary who you've criticised, said, Islamists are running Britain. Now, I won't ask you to comment on them, but just on Islamophobia in general in the UK, how normalised has it become? You talked about like tabloid news and media going after you. When you look at what's happening to your fellow British Muslims, what situation do you think they're in right now?
Well, it's hard to know unless you are a British Muslim, and I'm not. Obviously, I'm not. I'm actually an atheist, but I can sympathise with it, because you can see things, and I think I've been proud of my own sport, football, for the way it's reacted towards racism right across the board. I look at the dressing rooms, and you can see there'll be 20 odd people sitting around in a dressing room, and they'll be black, they'll be brown, they'll be white, they'll be Muslim, they'll be Christian, they'll be Catholic, they'll be atheist. Um, but does that matter? Not one jot. No one thinks of any of those things. They think, can he cross the ball? Can he knock it in? Is he going to get me a goal? Is he going to pass me the ball? And that's how it should be. It's beyond me that anyone could judge someone by their faith, judge someone by the color of their skin. It just does not make sense to me. So I can't speak for Muslims in terms of how it is for them, because I I honestly don't know. I'm a middle-aged white bloke. So it's very difficult to say, well, no, it's
I
like
guess, I
rubbish.
guess I was I was referring
But
I guess I was referring to your reaction to the rhetoric, but a lot
no,
of right wingers
exactly.
a lot
Yeah.
of right wingers often attack liberals for wanting refugees in their country, but not on their street. You hear this very often. Well, it's easy for you to want refugees. You don't have to deal with them. You actually ended up hosting 2 refugees, I believe, in your own home. Tell me about that experience and why you chose to do it.
Well, whenever I did tweet, as I said at the beginning, my pro-refugee stance, um, I always got that kind of rhetoric of, well, you wouldn't want them in your street, you wouldn't want them living in your house. Now, I always used to think, well, they're not going to live in your house, so and I'd have absolutely no problem with them living on my street. I mean, they're just people, they're just human beings like we are. They're no different. So I couldn't quite grasp it, but I always had that thing, and it was the old, you wouldn't have them in your house, you wouldn't have them in your house, and I thought, and then one day I saw it was another just below one of those tweets of something, there was a reply that said, Gary, you might be interested in this, and it was a link to the charity Refugees at Home. So I clicked on it, and it had a couple of options that you could do, and I thought, well, actually, there's one thing where you could offer like a fostering service, so kind of emergency. You can host people in emergency like situations. So I thought, well, let's have a look at that. And then I followed it through, and they have to come and interview you, make sure you are the right sort of person, etc. Past that, surprisingly, and so it went from there really. And then a few months later, I had a refugee in my home, and then a couple of months after that, I had another one, and they were both really, really positive experiences. Totally different backgrounds, but 2 delightful people that I'm still in touch with to this day. And it was a really uplifting experience, particularly I think for my boys. My boys, they've had obviously a very comfortable upbringing. They don't understand probably circumstances that force people to flee from their homes, like my two friends. So for them to listen to their experiences, to have dinner with them regularly and become friends with them, was really something very, very special. And I think it's been like a really good experience, particularly I think for my boys. I think it was very helpful to help them understand that how lucky they are.
Yes, well said. Did the two refugees know who you were before they came to stay with you?
Neither of them are football fans. I don't think that was deliberate. Unfortunately for both of them, they had to endure sitting through many boring football matches because that's all I do most of the time.
Fair
Um,
enough.
Otherwise, I end up on Twitter getting in trouble.
So I just wonder when you're getting in trouble on Twitter, is that because Twitter is just available now and it wasn't there in the 80s? Was the Gary Lineker who was playing for Barcelona, did he have strong views on the Spanish government's refugee stance in the late 80s? Or is this something you've become political over the years because of Brexit or Boris or Trump? Some people, I've talked to a lot of famous people, celebrities who say, I was never political and I've just become political recently because of the world. Or were you always like this?
I was always interested in politics. I would definitely not have had the same views in my 20s. I would have known about, Franco's Spain being in Barcelona and the oppression that they had as Catalans, and they weren't allowed to speak their own language, and that sort of thing. But vocally, I would have been quiet. I was very driven on my football. I was kind of cold in those days. I don't think I'd have had probably the empathy that I do now, and I don't know where that's come from. Maybe having children, life's experiences, who knows? So yeah, I think I'm a different character now. Yeah, it gets me in, it gives me a bit of grief sometimes, but I believe in what I say, and I think it's important. I personally, some people would disagree, feel I'm on the right side of things. Why would I say it if I didn't? So yeah, but yeah, it's very different back then. But I think it's been a gradual process. But coming to your point about Twitter or social media, I think before that, no one ever asked me about my political beliefs. No one asked, but suddenly when you've got a social media platform, you can push something out there, you post something, and people then go, "Oh, he's got political views as well," which I've always had, but
Yes.
never been able to share.
But
Probably for the best.
no. So I don't agree with that, obviously. Otherwise, I
Yeah,
wouldn't have you on today.
yeah.
But presumably, you share stuff because you care about it. You said you feel like you're on the right side of things, even controversial issues, whether it's Brexit, whether it's refugees. You famously compared, the Conservative Party's approach to 1930s Germany, got you in trouble, almost cost you your job last year. Recently, you used Twitter to share your pain over what's happening in Gaza, hugely contentious issue, as you know, at a time when a lot of celebs and public figures just don't want to say anything about this. They'd rather not touch it. With a barge pole. You even retweeted Owen Jones's interview with Israeli historian Raz Siegel, who we just interviewed recently, who's called what's happening in Gaza a textbook case of genocide. You got attacked for that. How would you describe what's happening in Gaza? What language would you use?
It's the worst thing I've seen in my lifetime. I've seen so many images of children that, I've got no skin in this game. I'm not Muslim. I'm, I, I'm, not Jewish. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Palestinian. So I see it, I think, purely from the outside as from a neutral perspective. And I can't think of anything that I've seen worse in my lifetime. The constant images of children losing their lives day in, day out. Now, obviously, we all know what, October 7th happened and, the Hamas thing. But the minute you raise your voice against what they're now doing there, um, you get accused of being a supporter of Hamas or, all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of heavy lobbying on people to be quiet. So I understand why most people refrain, but I'm getting on a bit now. Um, I'm fairly secure, and I can't be silent about what's happening there. I think it's so utterly awful. And now they're talking about, it already looks like it's happening, going into Rafah, where they've sent everybody down there. So, you know, I I don't think you can be, it's not anti-Semitic to say that what Israel is doing is wrong. And I just can't see how everybody doesn't see it that way now. For whatever the cause, whatever started it, and we all know that the history of this area of the world goes way before October the 7th. But it's truly dreadful what's happening, and I cry on a regular basis when I see certain images on social media.
We can agree on that. And I don't know if you're aware, but you're in good company now because Joe Biden is being accused by the Israeli government of being pro-Hamas too. So you're in good company if you're being accused of being pro-Hamas these days. Even the American president is. I do want to talk about football, but just one last thing on the politics of all this. You have this podcast empire now, some of the most listened to podcasts in the UK. For example, The Rest is Politics, hosted by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Given all the views you express on Twitter, have you ever considered hosting your own politics podcast, interviewing politicians maybe?
No.
No interest?
No.
What about running for office yourself?
Oh God, no! I'm interested in politics, but have no interest in being in politics. Is the truth? Yeah, we've got a number of podcasts, and thanks for mentioning Rest is Politics. You probably read it there. That's the Rest is Football. This is where that's the football one. Yeah, the guys are great on that, and I think what we tried to do with that particular podcast was to get two people from slightly different sides, one slightly to the left, one slightly to the right, to talk to each other and perhaps disagree on things, but disagree agreeably, and get some kind of kindness back in our world and into our politics, because it's just all culture wars and it's divisive and they're trying to turn us against each other. And I just don't understand how you can want to do those things. And I know sometimes politics can get yourself in desperate straits, but come on, we all live together. We all want to, just let's have some decency in our politics, please.
Well said. Okay, enough politics. Let's talk football, or soccer, as they say here in the US. But I still haven't got used to that. But let's start with a question about the politics of football before we get into pure football. Super rich Manchester City, state-owned by the UAE, on the brink of a fourth successive Premier League title, never done before by any English club, but about to do so while also facing 115 charges of alleged financial irregularity and breaches of the rules, which they deny. What is the point, Gary, of other clubs trying to beat them now when they're accused of basically buying Premier League wins? Why not just play for second place? Is there any point competing with City, Man City, which remains under a cloud? Is there any point?
Oh, well, there's always a point because it's football, and money doesn't buy you absolutely everything. I mean, without Pep Guardiola, I don't think they'd be achieving what they did. And obviously, most of those, well, almost all the charges were pre-Pep. But having said that, it is a cloud that will hang over that football club until those charges are faced and heard. They're different to the ones, I think, where the clubs this season, like Nottingham Forest and Everton, have had point deductions. I think they go back further, different kind of problems. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But despite all that, they do play some great football, and obviously it's not down to the players or the manager, but the way the club has been run, and we obviously we have to wait and see. They were already obviously found guilty and fined by UEFA. So yes, I think it's probably uncomfortable, particularly for Manchester City fans as well, to deal with, and possibly the players having that hanging over them. But we'll see what transpires and see whether they're found guilty or not, for a start.
We just discussed how you're a supporter of immigration, of foreigners coming into the country. Do you have any concerns about foreign ownership, especially foreign state ownership of English football clubs, especially countries with quote-unquote questionable human rights concerns?
Well, I think I've always had a slight issue with state-owned football clubs because I think, firstly, it doesn't feel right, and secondly, it doesn't seem fair if you're state-backed. But I'm afraid that train left the station some time ago.
Yes.
So we're kind of stuck with it. I mean, people in Newcastle, people in Manchester, and one or two other clubs, will talk about the difference they've made to circumstances in their cities and infrastructure, etc., things like that. And it's always easy to be judgmental on certain countries, and sometimes you have to look at yourselves as well. So we have to be a bit careful on that. But yeah, I've always been uncomfortable with state-owned football clubs. It just doesn't seem fair to me.
You were very critical of Qatar's human rights record during the World Cup in 2022. And when some of the Qataris criticised you for double standards, you said, no, America, which is hosting the 2026 World Cup, is an extraordinarily racist country. And then you got attacked by Tories for that too. Do you think the US, with all of its human rights problems right now, here at home and abroad, supporting what's happening in Gaza right now, do you think the US, when push comes to shove, if you're still at the BBC then covering the World Cup, will be held to the same kind of coverage standards as the Chinas and Russias and Qatars of this world when they host international sporting tournaments?
Well, to be perfectly honest, before every tournament, these kinds of things have raised. Obviously, the World Cup was played in Russia in 2018, 4 years after they'd invaded. So every World Cup I've ever done. I remember in Brazil in 2014, there were demonstrations on the streets saying they shouldn't be paying fortunes to build football stadiums; they should be building hospitals.
Yes.
So I suspect there'll be similar sort of things in America. They'll look at things that are going on there that the rest of the world doesn't like, and you always get that, and it's always like the week or two that before the World Cup, and everyone talks about these things. Then the World Cup starts, and everyone enjoys it.
Yes.
And it was similar in Qatar. I just pointed out a few facts at the start of the tournament, and just facts, not my opinions on things, because it's not the place to do that. But and I'm sure it will happen in continuing World Cups, because it's always the same. It's like when you announce an England squad before, or a US squad, if you like, before a tournament. People don't focus on the players in the tournament until the tournament starts. They focus on the players that are left out the squad.
Yes.
So there's always that negativity before any tournament.
So nice segue into my next question. We have the Euros coming up in a few weeks. How do you think England will do in this summer's Euros in Germany? Do you have faith in Gareth Southgate? There are some critics who think he's too cautious. He's not unleashing the young talent in his ranks. What's your view?
Well, my view is I think Gareth's done a wonderful job, and he's brought the squad together. He's brought belief back into the national sport. I think we've got an unbelievably talented group of players, as certainly the strongest squad-wise in Europe, certainly in midfield and going forward. We're really blessed at the moment. So if it doesn't happen in this tournament, it'll happen in 2 years' time or in 4 years' time. It will happen with this batch of kids. It's been a long time since England won a tournament, and we all had that, the old "it's coming home, it's coming home." I think we need to stop that, because it's clearly unlucky. And it points out that people think it's quite arrogant, but the actual song, if you listen to it, it's basically about our failures.
Yes, I remember it well. Yeah, I was 17, Euro 96.
So we'll see. But Gareth, it's difficult. It's a knockout competition. You play in other countries. You can have a bit of bad luck, like they did in the Euros. Missed penalty. It's a fine margins to win a tournament. But if you keep knocking on the door, eventually it'll open, and hopefully it'll be this summer. With the talent we've got, for me, we're favourites.
I'm going to sound like my dad asking this question. Everything was always better back then, you get from your dad. But I do have a nostalgia for the football era of my childhood, my teenage years. And I'm always arguing with my daughter about this. I don't follow football as much as I used to. I'm wondering where you stand on the whole then versus now football debate. Was the period of the 80s better when it was Maradona and Platini and Van Basten and you? Or is it today better with Ronaldo and Messi and Mbappe and Harry Kane?
It's better today. It's better today for a variety of reasons. Mostly, the playing surfaces are now perfect. The law changes. I know not all of them are great, but the fact you can't just scythe people down constantly like you did in the 80s. We also had the awfulness of hooliganism haunting the game back then. So the game has evolved, and I think it's evolved wonderfully. The great players of yesteryear would still, if they'd have been living today, would still be the great players of today. And likewise, the great players of today will be the great players of yesteryear.
What a diplomatic answer. I love it.
No, but it's actually a truthful answer, because I played with Diego Maradona, and I never thought I'd see in my lifetime a player that would come close to Diego.
Another Argentine.
But another Argentine, diminutive, left foot, similarities, and Messi has given. Well, Diego gave us I don't know, probably with his problems, 6-8 years of greatness. Messi's given us like 18 years, and he's still doing his stuff in America at the grand old age of 36 something now. So he's been great. So yeah, the game changes. but great players are still great players.
Gary, you do a lot of presenting, hosting, podcasting. We saw The Rest is Football right there with Alan Shearer and Ian Wright. Out of the three of you, who was the best striker?
Oh, definitely me.
Well, they'll never know.
Don't tell them.
Your
Don't tell
secret
them.
is safe with me. Last question. If you could swap careers with any other footballer, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Blimey. I think it would have to be Messi. I mean, yeah, it's common knowledge that I love the little fella. I think but you know what? It's not just what he does on the pitch and the magic and stuff. It's about he never dives. He doesn't play it. He doesn't pretend to be injured. He doesn't roll around on the. You can kick him as much as you want, but he'll try to stay on his feet. He's likable. He's kind of lovely family man, and he's the most sumptuous footballer that I've ever seen in my life. The things he does mesmerise me, and I played at the top level, and I played against Diego, and Diego did similar things, and he's the only person that comes close to me. But he does 4 or 5 things in a game that I never did in the entirety of my career. That's how good he was. Not that saying I was that good, but I could score.
Take your point.
The odd tap in.
It's lovely to see you speak about Messi in this way. It's lovely to have this conversation. Gary, I wish I could go back and tell my 7-year-old self that one day I'll be able to chat with you about Diego Maradona. Appreciate you taking time out for Mehdi Unfiltered.
Absolute pleasure, Mehdi.
Cheers, Gary.